Live Oak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm the Reverend Tamara Suzuki, and it is such a joy to be together with you this morning. I do want to say a word about our beautiful photograph that we have up, and thank you to Barbara Hodgson and David as her assistant for this amazing image. She works with something called Painting with Light, and so I just love this image, and I thank you for sharing it with us. Our call to worship this morning is a little bit on the longer side. I invite you to take a deep breath as we come together and center yourselves. It's by the Reverend Matthew Johnson, and it's called For 5,000 Years or More. For 5,000 years or more than 15,000 generations, human beings have been invoking spiritual power. My predecessors and yours gathered together to make sense of their lives and their place in the cosmos. And they have spoken aloud and invited what they conceived as sacred and powerful to be with them. They called upon the spirits of air and earth, fire and water. They called the bear and the deer. They asked for raven to protect them. They pleaded for the heroes of old to slay the monsters of their fears. And they sang songs they learned from their grandparents and moved in the appointed ways or in ways that were new but felt like the right thing to do. And they imputed power to these spirits, to the memories of these heroes. They called them gods, and they were invoked. Vishnu and Kali, Elohim, Odin, and 100 million others. Every group of people everywhere, they gathered to make sense of their lives and to make sense of their place in the cosmos. And they called these spirits to be present with them. And so do we. So do we as we gather this morning to make sense of ourselves and this universe in which we live as best we are able. And we call ourselves to worship together, to pay attention to the things that matter. And we invoke the power and wonder of life itself, that to which all those spirits of animals and memories of heroes pointed the way. We invoke that power, which is, we know, always around, always with us, but which we sometimes forget about. We forget that we are part of the whole of creation. We forget that we are stardust. We forget that we are capable of miracles, first among them, that we can love. We forget these things, and so we invoke the power of existence so that we can remember. So we can lift our eyes and open our ears to the true and the beautiful. For 5,000 years or more, we have done this. In many tongues, in many ways, we have done this. And so we continue that ancient tradition in our own way, in our own time. Let us now come together in power as we worship together this morning. Our spoken meditation this morning is called Three Things, and it's by Jan Tadeo. The storm outside echoes the storm within my soul. So many people in need, so much pain, so much grief. Too many causes and campaigns fill my mailbox, sap my energy, beg for my money. 3 things I must do? Only 3 things? You've got to be kidding. Which 3 do I choose? Books and letters, Magnets and movies implore me to dance as if no one is watching, learn 7 habits, make 4 agreements, give generously, vote often, express myself. Yet hundreds, thousands, millions live with hunger and thirst, in poverty, enduring violence and disease. Did Mother Teresa, Martin, Gandhi cry out with despair from the darkness of overwhelm? What 3 things did they choose? 3 things we must do. Is it to act in kindness, serve justice, love your neighbor even as you love yourself? But where do I start? So much thoughtlessness, hatred, and fear. Too little justice, too much selfishness. Who is my neighbor? 3 things, 7 principles, 10 commandments, 12 steps. All number of things speak to us, yet we must choose. We must choose to do something. So 3 things may be the right number. Not too few, not too many. But which 3 things shall I do? Will you do? Here's an adage I've always liked. Don't just do something, stand there. Stand in the surf, or sit on a rock, or lay your body across the earthy loam and be quiet. Very quiet. Do you hear it? That still small voice, the echo of your soul, reverberating with the call to your own true self to emerge. Then the calm within becomes the calm without. The storm blows over, the sun recovers its position of strength, and that glorious symbol of hope and unity emerges across the sky. At the end of this rainbow, a treasure. The 3 things you must do. Go outside yourself and know the needs of the world. Go within yourself and discover your life-given gifts. And then arch yourself like a rainbow bridge between the 2 and create a more beautiful world. Please join me in a time of silent reflection. In his characteristic, inimitable way, George Carlin has said, I knew there would be people that would chuckle before the joke even came. Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. Now, I think that most Americans would laugh at this as they thought of the large group of people whose views on this election and any of the other looming issues of our day that are different than their own. This concept of power is one that has engaged me for many years. Some of you might know that my first master's degree is in international relations. And so in that context, I spent a good bit of time researching and writing about power in its many forms. And my master's thesis for that degree was, of course, as a good Unitarian Universalist, I didn't know it yet, but I was a Unitarian Universalist when I was in school. My master's thesis for the degree was on the power of nonviolent action and the power that each of us holds both individually and communally. And so in this election year and beyond, we want to know that how we can make a positive difference in our world. Lately, I've had several very deep and long discussions with my young adult son, Gray. living as a young adult in this time, he and others of his generation and all of us face not only a time of turbulence, but also living with that deep fear and grief of the catastrophic changes that are in this time of climate change. It is the sense of powerlessness that I hear that breaks my heart, that the problems that we confront are somehow too big, that the state of affairs in our country is so corrupt that real change might not even be possible because the extent of the greed and corruption that we're up against. But the heresy of powerlessness eats away at our self-confidence, and at the same time, it seemingly justifies our growing lack of concern and apathy, our refusal to take our portion of the responsibility for the issues of our time. So, in a way, the sermon today is for my son, and for those of his generation, as well as for us all. There is no magic answer. If we want something done, we must do something. We must each claim our own power, be that superhero or superheroine, be the change that we're waiting for. First, a story by the author Joan Chittister. For a period of time, I drove from Cleveland to Erie on a fairly regular basis, a distance of about 100 miles. Time after time, I put the car on autopilot and headed for home, nothing but straight road, except for one thing. Every time I made the trip, I began to notice there was one solitary man standing back off the roadside at the edge of a ragged cornfield, a flag in his hand and a sign by his side, one small camp chair open, planted behind him. Trip after trip, week after week, in cold and rain and sleet, in hot sun and wind, there he stood alone, totally silent, keeping watch, eloquently silent. As the weeks went by, I began to slow down as I approached the area. I craned to see what he was selling. Nothing. I looked for signs of a crowd, an event, something that would give me a clue as to what he was about. Nothing. One day, I simply turned the car around and went back, drove down the berm slowly, and stopped. He was not an evangelist, obviously. He was much too quiet for that. He was not a policeman. He was not a traffic controller. There wasn't a car to be seen for miles. Just one thing stood out for me. He wore army fatigues, and on the broomstick standard that he held in one hand, while he waved with the other, he flew a homemade flag with a peace sign on it. Give peace a chance, the sandwich board sign propped up by the chair read. He himself, I realized as I got closer, had braces on his legs. He was just one man with one small peace sign, standing on an empty road, waving a handmade flagpole back and forth at every car that passed. But in my mind, that single man, a veteran, I presume, goes on waving every day of my life. It was his persistence, his dogged refusal to give up waving, his single-minded commitment to changing my mind that got me. There he stood in stark contrast to everything else my culture has ever tried to teach me about life. That big is better than small, that strong is more effective than weak, that the ability to make war is more important than the unremitting effort to make peace, that the individual is powerless in the face of juggernauts and corporations and a superpower world. We all have power, and we all have limitations. Each of us alone and standing together, we must figure out what we can do and then do it. Potential failure cannot become more important to us than witness and action. The world needs all of us to do whatever we can do. The key is to do what is yours with persistence and action as antidotes to powerlessness. And we also need to have an understanding of the constructive use of power. At the turn of the last century, in 1900, then Vice President Theodore Roosevelt counseled, "Speak softly, carry a big stick, and you will go far." Now that phrase speaks to the use of caution and non-aggression, while also having the ability to act aggressively if necessary. But the phrase also refers to two types of power, the soft power and hard power. And these two types of power are very different, from international affairs all the way down to our everyday lives. Soft power includes the use of diplomacy, influence, and persuasion. It's also called the power with, while hard power means military force, violence, and conquest, power over. Although the term soft power wasn't coined until the 1980s by Joseph Nye, who is a political scientist, the concept of soft power or non-violence was used as a political and social change agent, as we know, by people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. So here's the key. The basis of non-violent power, non-violent action, is that the exercise of power depends on the consent of the ruled. They have to say yes, but if they withdraw their consent, they can control or even destroy the power of their opponent. The concept of non-violence in general is an ancient concept. Many religions teach the concept of the golden rule, not harming others, but Gandhi extended the principles of nonviolence from the individual to the social and political plane. Gandhi is also the person who came up with the name that brought together different related ideas under one concept, Satyagraha. And Satyagraha means literally holding on to truth. It can also be described as soul force. Martin Luther King Jr. called it love in action. And this concept means that you hold on to the truth by way of ahimsa, or non-violence. The core of satya and ahimsa is non-violence. Satyagraha also includes the concept of suffering. It's hard for us sometimes to think of this piece of the three pieces of Satyagraha. The concept of suffering for the truth, which is called tapasya. Self-suffering is not undertaken for its own sake, but to demonstrate the sincerity flowing from the refusal to injure the opponent, while at the same time holding to the truth. It implies sacrifice and the willingness to sacrifice even to the death. So these three elements, satya, ahimsa, and tapasya, must be together for the success of any satyagraha campaign. In Gandhi's own words, "I have no message to give except this: there is no deliverance for any people on this earth, or for all the people of this earth, except through truth and nonviolence in every walk of life. No exceptions." And the concept of satyagraha was tested in 1930 when Gandhi set out from his ashram in Gujarat on March 12th with 78 followers and walked 241 miles in 24 days to arrive at Dandi on the Arabian Sea. And it was there I'm sure you know this story. It was there that he began making salt by evaporating seawater to protest the salt tax imposed by the British, but also to protest the British rule of India. Gandhi was arrested and put in jail for 9 months. But this exercise of satyagraha, soft power, was formative in the Indian independence movement of nonviolent protests that eventually forced the British to leave India. We all possess power. We possess soft power. We possess hard power. And the problem that we struggle with sometimes is denying our own power or misusing our power, or maybe sometimes even abusing our power. I love the quote that's on your orders of service today. It says, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that most frightens us." Because we have this capacity to use both the soft power and hard power in our interactions with others, all the way internationally, nationally, communally, and individually, we need to develop the skill to use our power with exceeding care. The Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote, "Anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, in the right way, that is not easy." And his words apply also to the use of power. Using power effectively is not always easy. Power is used best with satyagraha, with humility, with love as the core, and with the objective of creating a win-win outcome. And this means using the truth in love, nonviolence, and suffering when necessary. Another aspect of the use of power is to link the means with the ends. In other words, it has to be consistent. What is your ultimate goal? And what are the means that you're using to reach that goal? The means and the ends are inextricable. Nathan Walker writes, "I used to believe that being feared was powerful. I used to believe it was my duty to free the oppressed, but when reacting with righteous anger, guess who became the oppressor? So come, lovers of justice and keepers of the dream. Come, justified tyrants. You are all welcome here. None of us are exempt. We have played all the parts, the peacemaker, the warmonger. They live within us. That is why we, as seekers of freedom, are required to make justice not simply a product, but a process. Just actions are the means by which to achieve a just society. When we observe oppression, let us develop strategies that free not only the oppressed, but also the oppressor. And remember that those who use their power to deny freedom to others, they are also imprisoned and worthy of care. Do not let their unjust actions inspire us to justify employing cruel means, or else we'll become what we set out against. The challenge is this: let us take up the miseducation of justice making by stripping our conscience of images of equity that claim to manifest through condemnation or humiliation, through shame or blame, and righteous vindication. No, the craft of justice making begins by marrying a just thought with insightful words, inspiring us to collective action, daring to free both the oppressed and the oppressor, for we all, each, know what it's like to be both. So what kind of power could we value? Should we value? Is it the spreading of fear? So one is perceived as powerful? And yes, I did have a particular person in mind when I wrote those words. Or is it the speaking of truth in love that is ultimately the way of power? In the end, goodness undeterred has more power than all the forces of earth arrayed against it. Images seared in our hearts and in our minds of those who stood on the side of good against all the power that could be mustered against them. Think of that, if you close your eyes, think of that young Chinese man standing up to that tank in Tiananmen Square. Or maybe think of the fire hoses turned full force on the civil rights demonstrators in the 60s. Think of the people that were beaten viciously, one after the other, as they peacefully protested at the Dharasana salt works during the Indian Salt March. And the list goes on. And all of us, I'm sure, have been involved in perhaps less dramatic, but equally important efforts. I know when I was in my teens, I think it was actually in my teens before I actually tasted a grape, because my parents were supporting Cesar Chavez and the boycott. I didn't even really know what they were. So, and also think of the man in the story today who was standing there silently day after day, witnessing, changing the hearts and minds of people who passed by. Think of our own members of our Live Oak community who are out there in the community when called and when we can, supporting our brothers and sisters as we witness for change and progress. We are powerful beyond measure. Power that lives in the willingness to stand alone if need be until the world is forced, just by reason of our unremitting, stubbornly committed presence, to recognize that there is more to the question than the answer that we have been given. Power that recognizes that the means and the ends are inextricably bound together. Power that uses satyagraha, truth in love, nonviolence, and suffering when necessary for the cause of good. Power with others rather than the power over others. We can all be the powerful superheroes in our lives and perhaps in the lives of those around us. Let us all carry on and bless the world with our power. We are the change that we've been waiting for. Amen. To join hands for our benediction. The words of today's benediction are by the Reverend Mark Bellatini. Go in peace, live simply at home in yourself, be just in your word, just in deed. Remember the depth of your compassion. Do not forget your power in the days of your powerlessness. Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and never stint your hand of charity. Practice forbearance in all you do. Speak the truth or speak not. Take care of your body. Be good to it. It is a good gift. Crave peace for all peoples of the world, beginning with yourself, and go as you go with the dream of peace set firm in your heart. Amen. And now, as we extinguish the flame of our communal chalice, now is when our service truly begins.